The clerk shall announce the next order of business.
Mr. Speaker, the fourth and final portion of the morning hour reserved for member requests for points of personal privilege.
The delegate from Powhatan, Delegate Ware.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise for a point of personal privilege.
Delegate has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, in the wee hours of Friday morning, I opened my phone up and I got an email from a constituent who is a CPA. And it was quite candidly a cri de coeur, a cry of the heart to us, to me in this case, but to all of us. And, you know, you say, could an accountant, those folks who wear the eye shades, do that? I can tell you, having been married to one for a number of years, they can. They do have a heart, and they are concerned about what's going on up here about tax conformity and tax reform. And I want to kind of take you through this. I started one day in the legislature. 2 days later, my wife started as an accountant. So we've followed through that sequence and the regular annual experience. We reintroduce ourselves on April 16th with the kind of schedules that we keep for those seasons. And you all will know, because you're starting to get them in the mail, those W-2 forms and the other tax-related information that's due by the end of January. Somebody prepared that to send it to you. The next thing that comes along is that there's tax preparation software. And for that to be accurately prepared, they need to know things. And they need to know things from us promptly, very soon, within a couple of days. And that urgency is what drives me to speak about the matters that I'm going to speak about today. Because I've had several of you on both sides of the aisle who said, you know, Lee, you usually carry a tax conformity bill. Why are you not doing it this year? There's a very simple reason why I didn't do it this year. Because in 2019, tax conformity is tax policy. They're wrapped up together. If we conform with nothing else, we have altered the taxes. And so that is an important thing for us to be aware of and to consider. There is a significant amount of new revenue that is available because of the tax reform plan at the federal level. As the gentlelady said recently, was it yesterday perhaps or sometime recently, the estimates from Chainbridge, our consultant, is just shy of $600 million annually that's going to be available. So what's the answer to this conundrum that we find ourselves in? There have been several prominent answers brought forward. A number of people have had suggestions. The governor has suggested a proposal which is essentially twofold. The first is to make the earned income tax credit refundable. And then secondly, he would spend almost all of the rest. Those are the two elements of what the governor's proposal to date suggests. Another major option has been that put forward by Delegate Hugo. And his bill likewise has a couple of major components. The first would increase the standard deduction for all taxpayers from the most basic on up to those who have a higher deduction, but it would help statistically those at the bottom the most. Standard deduction increased, and then secondly, and this would be a significant change, he would permit those in Virginia who don't itemize at the federal level to itemize on their state taxes. And as has been suggested, that would increase the burden on auditing for Virginia. There is no question about that. That's one of the challenges to that legislation. I think they recognize, as all parties to this debate recognize, that it's a temporary change which phases out under the current terms of the federal legislation in 2025. And so that is recognized in the legislation and suggestions that have come forward thus far. What has made this a particularly difficult thing is that the Tax Cut and Jobs Act of just over a year ago in Washington is not a simple bill. It is complex. Unlike the last major tax reform that occurred during the Reagan years, 1986, the Reagan tax reforms, which were essentially about bracket alterations, the moving up and down within brackets. What we have before us is not structurally simple. And I think that's part of why we have grappled with this. It's part of why it's been a conundrum beyond all the ordinary fissures and difficulties that there are in any complex legislation. Let me take us back to 1986. What would they be, 32 years or so ago? Something like that. In 1986, this chamber had a healthy majority of Democrats. The chamber down the hall, likewise, had a healthy majority of Democrats, and the governor was also a Democrat. And as they looked at what they did with a somewhat similar but simpler challenge, what they did was sequestered what would come along, what was called a windfall. And let me just parenthetically note, what is a windfall? You know, that's what happens when we have something like the weather that came through over the weekend. Stiff wind, the apples get blown out of the tree, and we have an unexpected bounty. We hit the lottery, okay? When you hit the lottery, that money is what you didn't expect. This we expect, we anticipate, we can make estimations of. We will know when tax season is concluded. At that point, in 1986, Virginia sequestered the windfall. They made adjustments to the tax code, and the third part is they allowed taxpayers to file amended returns based on that. That tax revenue was returned to the taxpayers. If we have an agreement in the next couple of days, that would be the best possible outcome. I hope for that. To the extent that I've been party to those conversations, I've urged that. That would be the best. I'm not sure if that's realistic, but if it is not realistic, I think the best opportunity would be this. I'd be willing to carry that conformity bill with the expectation that we would do something akin to what was done in 1986. That is, conform, sequester the windfall, and have a prompt special session which deals with how we are going to apportion that windfall that is going to come to the Commonwealth of Virginia. And I want you to think about this as you think about those tax preparers, including ordinary folks and CPAs and others. But I also want you to think about that young nurse, that young teacher, that deputy that is wondering and waiting how we're going to deal with this most important duty that we have, this fundamental duty that we have on how to apportion taxes. If we fail to do that, and if we fail to timely reconfigure the tax code, I believe we will have failed in a fundamental task that we have before us. I don't believe we are consigned to failure by inaction. But having spoken with and having listened to members on both sides of the aisle and in both chambers, and having heard the governor's pledge to us of his willingness to be a party and a working party to this necessary agreement, it is my conviction that we can act, but we must act promptly. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.